like to welcome Clyde Foster from Centurion in Pretoria, South Africa. And Clyde Foster is a planetary imager. And I think we must start, Clyde, why planet imaging? Why this hobby?
Yeah, I've had a lifelong interest in astronomy from a very young age, dating back to the 1960s and the age of Apollo. But in more recent times, as I approached the end of my career, I invested in a new telescope, and I developed very much of an interest, and it developed from there into really a passion for planetary imaging. Now, within astronomy, various people take photographs and images, many of them of the galaxies and stars, but specifically with planetary imaging, what we're doing is we're looking in detail at the surface of the various planets. And it's become a bit of a specialty field, and a lot of interaction taking place in the professional amateur community in this specific field of planetary imaging.
We had news of an impact on your favorite planet, and that's obviously Jupiter. That happened a while ago. Is this rare, or is it quite common?
Yes, in the early hours of yesterday morning, an impact was observed by a Brazilian observer, and we've seen this before, most notably back in 1994 when we had the Schumacher-Levy comet break up, and then it had various impacts on Jupiter, and resulting in various dark features appearing on the planet. Now, over the last 10 or so years, the amateur community has been looking out for these type of impacts, and in fact there's been I think the latest count is that there's been 7 impacts in about the last 10 years. So they are relatively rare. They obviously cause a lot of interest and excitement in this community. I mentioned to you a little bit earlier my interest in astronomy through the years, and 2014 was a bit of a milestone for me, where I invested in this specific telescope, which is well known for planetary imaging, and just the various other images on the slide down at the lower left. Everything is done on computers nowadays with telescopes and the technology that we have. So that's the workstation in the observatory. The observatory itself is in my back garden in Centurion. It's got a motorized roll-off roof, so that it's very easy for me to go out there in the evenings, just push a button and the roof opens up. The image at lower right is the workstation in my study, where I do all my image processing. One of the things that I picked up on when I got into this planetary imaging field, obviously I got involved because I was enjoying the challenge of trying to capture the details on the planets, and I basically spent a huge amount of time and effort obviously finding all the possible information that I could on the internet, and then of course spending every opportunity that I could out in the observatory capturing the planets. But what I came to realize quite quickly was that there's this relatively small community of very serious planetary imagers scattered across the world. And these images are pretty much out there every evening, like myself. And I found that they were uploading their images to these various international databases. And in fact, these databases are utilized by the professional planetary science community for professional research. And of course, with me going into retirement and this becoming an area of interest to me, what was particularly exciting for me was the fact that I could see that I could actually make a serious contribution in the field of planetary science. And that was obviously quite an eye-opener for me in those first few years of planetary imaging. So this is an image that sometimes causes quite a bit of interest. On the right-hand side is an image that I captured of Mars on the 2nd of May, 2016. But on the left is an image which was captured by the Hubble Space Telescope 10 days later. And I think all that this does is to show the level of technology, and with the combination of both the telescopes, the cameras, and the software that is made available to us as amateur astronomers and planetary imagers, these are the type of results that we can get. You obviously can't compare Hubble with a backyard observatory telescope, but certainly there's a high level of detail that we are able to get to. And one of the exciting things about imaging Mars was the planet that I really started off taking a lot of images and developing my skills, was we've got this huge amount of weather patterns on Mars that we can track on a night-to-night basis. The polar caps, on the left you can see the orographic cloud formations over the huge volcanoes that we have on Mars. But yeah, a major milestone for me came in 2017, at which stage I had been developing a reputation in the planetary imaging community and the planetary science community. And I was actually invited by a colleague from France to attend the European Planetary Science Congress in Riga, Latvia. And quite honestly, that seemed a bit of a different world to me. But they informed me that I would be able to get some funding to support me in terms of getting to Riga. And the whole dream came together. And that's literally what it was. It was a dream coming alive. I could never, in my wildest dreams, have thought of attending a professional planetary science congress at a faraway country, and interacting with the people that I would come to meet. Now, there's a few people that I was introduced to there down at the lower left. There's Dr. John Rogers of the BAA, who I'd met previously from the British Astronomical Association in London. And Dr. Glenn Orton, an absolute veteran of just about every NASA mission to the outer solar system that you can think of. But that image down at the lower left, we were sitting and having a drink, and then the chap at the upper right came across, and I was introduced to him without actually knowing who he was. And I said, "Hi, I'm Clyde." And he like looked at me and he said, "You're Clyde?" And I said, "Yes." And I wasn't sure what was coming next. And he said, "From South Africa?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, I can't remember the exact words. I was in a fuzz by that stage. And he said, what a pleasure to actually meet you. And it's tremendous the work that you're doing and the contribution that you're making. So, of course, we carried on chatting out of courtesy. And when I got the opportunity, I'd obviously been given his name by now, and I went and quickly Googled. And Dr. Lee Fletcher, that chap at upper right, is one of the leading planetary scientists studying the atmospheres of the gas giant planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And that was an absolute moment in time for me where I realized that the level of contribution that I was making, where I could find myself at an international planetary science conference, and I've got people of this caliber coming up to me and expressing their appreciation for the work that I was doing in supporting the planetary science community. Just an absolutely moment in time for me, just totally amazing. Yeah, Saturn is my main planets are Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. I do work on the other planets as well, but Saturn obviously always catches people's attention. Quite a difficult target, obviously being a lot further away than Jupiter, but certainly worth putting the effort in to capture the beauty of this planet. One thing that always catches me is the diversity of colors on the planet, obviously, which are chemically derived, but the diversity of Saturn in terms of its color is just stunning.
Wow, beautiful.
And one of the developments that came more so over these last few years, again, as my reputation was growing in the both the amateur planetary imaging community and the professional planetary science community, was that my images were being used more and more in professional papers. And as an outcome of that, eventually I was being approached to be included as a co-author on these professional papers. So, for example, you can see the famous polar hexagon on Saturn. It's quite amazing. At the lower right, you can see an image, I think it's from the Cassini spacecraft, but quite amazing that everything on the planet is so symmetrically spherical and linear, and yet around the polar, you've got this amazing hexagonal jet stream formation. And this paper down at the lower center, there was a research paper published in the Geophysical Research Letters, and I was included as a co-author. This was a little bit of a spin-off, which I didn't really see coming, where I started getting invited to various TV interviews, specifically on the planets. Any planetary related issues, then I was invited in either to SABC and I've done a number of ENCA live interviews. I must admit it's an experience on its own. I'm not one to enjoy particularly being in the limelight, and the SABC one with Maas was the very first one. I mentioned to you a little bit earlier my interest in astronomy through the years, and 2014 was a bit of a milestone for me, where I invested in this specific telescope, which is well known for planetary imaging. And just the various other images on the slide down at the lower left, everything is done on computers nowadays with telescopes and the technology that we have. So that's the workstation in the observatory. The observatory itself is in my back garden in Centurion. Reddish flakes that came off due to the interaction with smaller storms, and this developed a lot of interest in the planetary science community, but also spread across to the general public as well, because the great red spot was seen to actually be shrinking. But again, on the back of that, I was included as a co-author on a paper in the JGR, or Journal of Geophysical Research for Planets. One of the I think one of the most fascinating aspects of the journey that I've been on these 7 years is that as I've attended these international conferences, I've been introduced to the NASA Juno mission team. Now, the Juno spacecraft is in orbit around Jupiter. It was launched in 2011, arrived at Jupiter in 2016, and has been operational ever since. And one of the areas where collaboration is taking place between the mission team and the amateur planetary imaging community is that every 53 days, the spacecraft swoops in low over the planet and captures incredibly amazing images. But in preparation for those, what we call perigeo flybys, the mission team requests the amateur planetary imagers to take images of Jupiter about a week before the flyby. And from there, from those images, the mission team is able to identify specific features on Jupiter that they will target for imaging by the spacecraft when it swoops in low over the planet. I was invited in 2018. There was a workshop at the Royal Astronomical Society in London. And again, I was, because of the work that I was doing in support of the Juno mission, I was invited to this workshop and gave a presentation. Just another wonderful experience where you're able to interact with basically the leading planetary scientists in the world, fellow imagers from around the world, and of course the NASA mission team. And then there was a rather special event or experience that took place last year in May. As I was taking images in support of the Juno mission, there was an upcoming perigeo flyby 2 days after this specific image. And there's a specific wavelength and filter that we use to capture specific aspects of Jupiter's atmosphere. Basically, in the methane wavelength, which is typical of this type of image that I'm showing here, the bright areas are very high in Jupiter's atmosphere. So, for example, the largest bright area there is the famous Great Red Spot. And that indicates that the upper clouds of the Great Red Spot are actually at high altitude in Jupiter's atmosphere. But when I was taking these images, I could see that there was a brand new bright spot just to the lower right of the Great Red Spot. And the animation on the left shows that 10 hours before, it was not existing. And the fact that this was going to be observable by the spacecraft, the Juno spacecraft, 2 days later, generated a huge amount of excitement, both within the NASA team, but obviously within the whole planetary science community. And I'm not quite sure how it happened, but this feature would become known extensively as Clyde spot. And 2 days later, the Juno spacecraft would swoop in over the cloud tops of Jupiter, and we got these amazing images of this brand new storm that had broken out on Jupiter. It took about a little bit over a month for NASA to put out the press release. Now, after every perigeo flyby, they put out a press release highlighting anything interesting about what had been observed by the spacecraft. And I was expecting a little bit of a comment in their press release, maybe just a mention of Clyde spot. In fact, what happened, which was just another earth-shattering experience for me, was that their whole press release was put out entitled Clyde spot on Jupiter. They went out on Instagram, on Twitter, on NASA YouTube, and they just went full on, basically publicizing the whole Clyde spot story. And basically what it has become is almost a classic case study of professional amateur collaboration between amateur planetary imagers and the professional planetary scientists working at NASA. And of course, on the back of the NASA press releases, it pretty much went extensively into open media, obviously extensively in the astronomical media, but it extended further. I was involved in interview on carte blanche, which was obviously a very interesting experience and very enjoyable. All pretty much new experiences for me, and I think that's the journey that I've been on for these last 7 years, is that I'm almost on this train journey, but I've got no idea where the destination is. But every time we stop at a station, I just have incredibly amazing experiences. And then the Juno spacecraft is in a progressive orbit, so it continuously looks at different areas of Jupiter. And there was intense excitement as we got to mid-April this year, because this would be the first opportunity 10 months after the outbreak of Clyde spot, where the spacecraft would swoop in low over what was now being called the remnant of Clyde spot. We could see from Earth-based observations and even from Hubble Space Telescope images that the storm had retained its activity to some extent, but there was no clear indication of exactly what form the storm had taken. And then, of course, on the specific flyby where the spacecraft swooped in low over the remnant of Clyde spot, we got these incredible new images of Clyde spot. This is a specific structure that we see in other places on Jupiter. But what is exciting, and what was exciting for both the planetary scientists and obviously myself, was the fact that this type of structure normally grows and develops into something more extensive. So although the fact is that many storms on Jupiter are very short-lived, they can last a day or a week or a few months, and then they disappear because Jupiter is just so dynamic. In this specific instance, Clyde spot has developed into a structure that looks like it's going to develop further and be specifically quite long-lived. And of course, my friends and colleagues at NASA built on the original Clyde spot story, and the press release on the back of that specific Juno flyby. They again just went on full with the development of the Clyde spot story, with the article entitled "Juno Returns to Clyde Spot on Jupiter." I've had interaction with the lead scientists on the Juno mission, and I often interact with them, and they get very excited. I said, obviously from my perspective, I'm incredibly thankful for them for, developing the story. But Scott Bolton, the principal investigator on the Juno mission, he said to me, "Clyde, we love this. He can't wait to tell people about the type of story where you've got an amateur who has developed a new or identified a new feature on Jupiter just before the spacecraft flies over. The spacecraft captures all the detail and the images. The professional planetary scientists can do their research, and it's just a classic case of professional amateur collaboration." Just want to thank you for the opportunity of sharing my story, my journey. It's been, as I say, a story that you could not really plan. I had no idea when I bought that new telescope in 2014, the type of experiences that I would go through over these last 7 years. But I should just make the comment that, the publicity behind Clyde spot, as nice as it is, the greatest pleasure and personal reward that I get, I believe, is the sense of contribution that I'm making to the planetary science community. And more so than that, the fact that I enjoy being out in the observatory night after night, seeing what is happening on each of these planets. It's just an incredibly fascinating field to be in. And of course, over the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to see people going to Mars. We're going, hopefully in my lifetime, hopefully in your lifetime, but there's every possibility that we're going to be here and physically watching people living on Mars. But the expeditions, the missions that are planned to the various planets, we're in the golden age of both planetary imaging and space exploration. And it's just an incredible field to be in.
Clyde, no, what an impressive story. As you've said, you know, this is not something that you can dream up, and yet it happened to you. And for me, your job is one thing, but your role is more important than your job in this case. And your role is just growing and growing and growing, and the significant contribution that you're making. Man, you are living a meaningful dream. So we are so excited with you, and I'm sure we're going to be back talking to you, because we are just scratching the surface. And all the best for your move to your new site. We are keen to go there with you and come and visit you there. Go well. Thank you very much.